All right, welcome to Social Distillation, the submarine still of the internet, where we attempt to drop the bead, pour white lightning straight onto your brain. And I could use some white lightning and some white lightning and Red Bull. I think that's what I need.
Well, since I might be done for today, and then you had to go do your thing, which gave me a moment to think, I'm going to open up a bottle here. For those of y'all that are in Texas, this may be the best bourbon I've ever had. It's Shire Distilling out of Brookshire near Houston. And they had a tasting and I was just blown away. So I had to get me a bottle.
These aren't the same people that do the peanut butter.
No.
Okay. No. That was one of the best flavored whiskeys that I'd ever
had. You're thinking of Screwball.
Okay.
Yeah. Now this company, they have a cinnamon. And for those that are turned off by Fireball because it is so artificial flavoring, it is
really harsh.
It's infused, and it is.
Have I tried that?
No, because I just found these guys like 2 weeks ago. But so I don't know if it's available outside of Texas yet. But
I remember one of the last times I was down there, you had a cinnamon something that was pretty good and wasn't like a Fireball, which is really harsh.
Was it something I infused?
Maybe.
It might have been when I just took another one and repurposed it.
I like infused flavored things, but I very rarely get them because they either taste very artificial or they're very harsh. Like
that's how you
the way a Fireball burns.
Well, that's how you tell if they're infused or flavored. Fireball is flavored, so they basically just take a squirt of whatever concoction they use to do it, where infused would actually have the stick in there for about 2 or 3 days.
The only flavored thing I get regularly is coconut rum.
Now I've got a good infused coconut rum too. I think I have a little left, so next time you come down, I'll save that. But yeah, they have these tastings at Specs when I go in there on Saturdays, and sometimes you come across something gold. And this one, now this is the expensive bottle, so that's why I only poured 2 fingers and I didn't pour a whole glass, because we're gonna let that but even the expensive bottle is only $40.
Well, speaking of Texas stuff, for anyone who's interested, I think I've mentioned before, and I'll plug Frios, which they were restocking the last time I went in, and so that's not what I've got in my root beer here. I actually went with Star Blue because they make a good discount vodka. So I'm trying their gin as a alternative discount gin, and I find it better than Gordon's. But Frios is my go-to.
Drinks Gordon's.
Yeah, it's okay.
Ever since they started the product placement.
I can't drink it anymore after I found Frios, which is made in the hill country somewhere. And I kind of got it on accident just because I was like, what's this? And it's only a couple bucks more than Gordon's, but to me, it's almost as good as Bombay. So I find it the best value gin because it's only a little bit more expensive than like a Gordon's level, but it's a lot tastier.
And here's a golden rule. If someone tells you they don't like Bombay, that means they drink Tanqueray. That's been the pattern I've known. Anybody that's ever said, well, if other than people that just don't like gin, any gin drinker that says they don't like Bombay, they drink Tanqueray, which is like turpentine. As much of a drinker as I am, I would have to be out of anything and everything, and it would be my only option, and me be jonesing for me to drink Tanqueray.
Let me make some bathtub gin here.
The same thing with I know a lot of people like it. If you're a fan of peat, then you're gonna disagree with me, but I do not like Jameson. A lot of people, Jameson shots. I'm like, you know what? I can actually pass on this shot, even though you're buying. So I'm not a big fan of that. Wheel of Time. Scott will be in the house, and he's a Texas guy, East Texas, so you might be able to find this if you're a whiskey drinker. If not, well, let us know in the comments what your favorite go-to drink when you're sitting and having a little time with your book or listening to us, because God
Re-
knows you need to drink when we're talking.
reading these books always makes me want to get an ale or a cider or a brandy or something like that, because it is something that's mentioned often. Um,
Well, I'm
and I
going to
can't.
England in August, and I definitely on the bucket list is to hit a pub there, one of the local pubs, because we're gonna be in a couple small towns. So
In fact, I may, the next time I go to restock, I may try and find, because I can't remember the name of it. Because I was looking for a brandy for something. I don't remember what. I was making a hard something rather. And I just asked a guy there. I go to Total Wine because the two specs that are closest to me are like twice as far. So I just asked him, I was like, what's a good brandy for this? And he said, yeah, try that. And I was like, oh, okay, that's good.
well, what we didn't make officially, and that I gave you to take home,
Mhm.
if you age that for a little bit in a barrel, it's brandy.
Yeah.
We
Maybe
didn't
we
make
may get some
anything
barrels.
officially. We
No.
just happened to stumble across heat and fermented fruits. And
Yep. Speaking of which, I'm picking off the last of the blackberries, which I feel like that's the best use for that, because the later season blackberries aren't nearly as good as the earlier summer blackberries. So I've been tossing them in the freezer, and
you could also, if they're real potent, like a lot of flavor for a little bit of fruit, then you can also do wine with that. My grandpa used to make a great blackberry wine.
I had not. I've never had the urge to try that, but maybe I will just for giggles.
Yeah,
All right.
I need some different equipment for that, because you got to keep it like with the other thing that we don't do. It doesn't matter that a little bacteria gets in there or whatever over the time, because it's going to be put on fire. Which is with the wine and stuff, you have to have a lot better airlocks and things like that to.
Yeah, I keep meaning to can my extras, and I end up freezing it more often than not, just because I'm really paranoid about canning. Unless it's like a pickle, because it's so strong, the pH is so high that it's, if you don't get that cook quite right, you're okay, you're safe.
Well, that
'Cause it's
medley you
just-
gave me with the cucumbers,
Yeah.
the was it carrots and onion.
And
That
I
was,
think there was some jalapeno in there.
yeah, that was great. It made for the best use for it was taking some for eating healthy, was just taking some generic packaged tuna,
Mhm.
which I don't like on its own, but I mixed it with that and a little bit of mustard, and it was all you could taste were the vegetables. So it was great.
Oh, I'll have to try that next time I need a after gym meal. All right,
All
so
right, so to the books. We are going to try to
Backtracking a
finish
second.
Perrin.
so I skipped over the first part of chapter 42 because it was Wolf Dream stuff, and that's going to lead more into, and he's, because Jordan is setting the stage here at the beginning of chapter 42, which is 683 in our paperbacks here. He's setting the stage for two things with this foray into the Wolf Dream here, which I really like, and is one of those things that you get on the reread of why this stuff, the whole scheme works, is because of the way Jordan sets up and pays off. And he's setting up two things here. He's setting up the later confrontations against Slayer, both here in a few chapters and then through the whole series. But he's also setting up Perrin learning from his failure, if you will, the of walking into that ambush. Because one of the things he thinks as he's hunting down Slayer here is, hold on a second, I almost did it again, of going to where expecting an enemy to do what I want him to do, to be where I want him to be, and to wait where I want him to wait. And then he also realizes that Slayer is that Perrin isn't the only hunter here. The Slayer is also a hunter, and he's trying to draw me in. And so he also learns, accepts that, you know what, I'm gonna fold this hand because it's not worth it. And then he steps away from the dream, which is also kind of a big deal, that he can he has already learned how to step out of the dream world and into a normal dream, which he actually kind of doesn't realize he can do, because there's a bit of a panic for a second, because he's actually trying to wake up and he can't. And so there's a bit of a panic there before it fades away into just dream. So there's a lot of setup here for stuff that's going to pay off later when he goes back into the wolf dream. But Jordan has a main thing, and all of these other things are secondary, because the title of the chapter is The Missing Leaf. Which is what the main thing is here. And when we skip ahead to chapter 44, which is where we left off after Perrin is healed, that's where that main thing comes right back up, which is Gaul and Loyal are gone. He manages to get out of Faile, and they've gone to deal with the Waygate.
I was checking the comments to see if there was anything that wasn't spoilery in there, but yeah,
it's not like Perrin is learning. It's not like he's learned. And that's something we can keep an eye on as we go through all of Perrin's storylines down the road, because it's one of our criticisms, and we can, reevaluate as we go. But he still is who he is, and his first instinct is, I've got to go after them. I told them to wait for me. They're going to get themselves killed. And as Faile rightly points out, hey, dummy, you can barely walk. What do you think you're going to do? You've got an ogier and a freaking ninja out there on their own. If anyone can do it, they can. You're not going to help. You're going to hinder. But his instinct is, I've got to do this.
In fact, there are multiple times in these books where Jordan points out someone not winning the fight because someone else was hindered, and they decided to change their game plan to go help that person. So he actually gives us examples of how Perrin would have been a liability in that case, and actually get his friends killed. Because Loyal would defend him.
Yeah, there were some. I mean, we kind of skimmed through their story because it's really short. But in both this book and the previous book, the girls did that a couple of times. Of walked into dangerous situations that they weren't really equipped to deal with, trying to help. Yeah, sure, their intentions were great, but they underestimated their opponents and overestimated themselves.
Well, it was one of the whole themes with the girl storyline and Matt's storyline in book 3 about it being a trap and them springing the trap or trying to spring the trap. That's why people kidnap people, to get the other person to come in, because it makes them make stupid decisions.
I don't think we should go too much farther without pointing out that the opening pages of this chapter are hilarious, and I love them every time I read them, because you have some fun situational comedy that is woven in with this continuing growth of Perrin and Faile as a couple, as they're talking and bantering and arguing with each other. But then he makes it a fun read with, literally falling down the stairs, Dick Van Dyke style. But more seriously, where was it? Okay. That's specific. All right. So jump to page 712. And this is where, I understand finding Faile kind of annoying sometimes, and kind of flipping the book over and yelling at some of her actions, especially later. But I don't understand the hate, again, as we've been beating the dead horse. And this is another example of why, because I really love this scene here where Mistress Alver comes in because of the commotion, and oh, my dear, Mistress Alver said, shaking her head, that is quite the wrong way. Leaning close to the younger woman, she whispered softly, but Perrin heard every word. He was an easy little boy to manage most of the time if you handled him properly, but when you tried to push him, he was as muley as any other Two Rivers men. As any in the Two Rivers, men don't really change that much, only grow taller. Okay, well, that's true. Harsh but fair. If you go telling him what he must and mustn't do, he will surely lay his ears back and dig in his heels. And so then she proceeds to try and, coax him into doing what he should do, until finally Faile puts her foot down and sides with Perrin of, Mr. Salvaire, where you have the horse saddled and brought around. If you please, Mr. Salvaire, Faile said firmly, and my horse too. Why did you change your mind? Tucking his shirt in for him, she muttered under her breath. Doubtless he was not supposed to hear well enough to understand. I mustn't say must I? When he is too stubborn to see straight, I must lead him with honey and smiles, must I? She shot him a glare that surely had no honey in it, then abruptly changed to a smile so sweet he very nearly backed away. My dear heart, she almost cooed, pulling his coat straight. Whatever is happening out there, I do hope you will stay in your saddle and as far from Trollocs as you can. You really are not up for facing a Trolloc just yet, are you? Maybe tomorrow. Please remember you are a general, a leader, and every bit as much a symbol to your people as that banner out there. If you are up where people can see you, it will lift everyone's heart, and it is much easier to see what needs doing and give orders if you aren't in the fighting yourself. Picking his belt off the floor, she buckled it around his waist, settling his axe carefully on his hip. She also batted her eyes at him. Please say you will do that, please. And obviously, there's a bit of sarcasm in her, sweet cooing words, because she says on multiple occasions that if the Trollocs don't kill you, I will if you go near harm.
Mm-hmm.
So already she gets Perrin, and it's not illogical that she would understand him in this way, because to a middle-aged woman, Perrin's still, he's still a boy. He's barely a man, literally barely a man. So obviously Mistress Alver is looking at who he was and doesn't yet fully understand who he is. Faile understands who he is, but then also wants to help him fulfill that potential to its utmost, even more so than he does. So she understands how to deal with him, even more than someone who he grew up with.
Well, it's an interesting kind of blending too, though, because she took the advice but adapted it to the man she knew.
Oh, that's a good point. Yeah.
So it shows a little bit of adaptability,
and now, it's building off the earlier scene when they first get to Emmons Field, and Faile had that little talk with Mr. Salvaire and kind of did some of those things of how to deal with him, in the way that Mr. Alver was advising, and here she kind of starts that, but then shifts and adjusts to something different.
I want to make something clear as we talk, because we do pour a lot of love on her in this reread. I do not like the Faile hate, as in, why is she even in this book hate?
Yes.
She's not my type. She would, maybe the first night I wouldn't kick her out of bed for eating crackers, but after that, when the personality comes out, it wouldn't have lasted long.
I'm going to clean the crackers out of my bed. I'm expecting company. If you don't know who that is, then I'm ashamed of you. Go.
Actually do not know who that is.
Going to clean the crackers out of my bed. I'm expecting company.
Oh.
Groucho Marx.
Groucho Marx.
I think that's duck soup, but I can't remember exactly. Go watch the Marx Brothers, kids. they're still hilarious. And you say that, and it actually makes me understand the Faile hate a little more, because really because of what Mr. Salvera says here about Perrin being such a sweet boy. And that has followed him into manhood. Still, he is a very, polite, usually quiet, unless he, really gets stirred emotionally. He's usually a quiet, reserved man. And and so in a lot of ways, this is an opposites attract situation. But they're not polar opposites. They are still complementary, and that's where Faile comes in, and where she matters to Perrin's story is because she is so different in personality that, were it not for the situations that Perrin would be has been thrown into, you can see him living his life as an introvert.
Mm-hmm.
And she is most definitely not introverted in the slightest.
I think Jordan might have even gone overboard in his descriptions of Perrin, that to say that you're exactly right. If their life wasn't turned on its head and him being thrust into the limelight, he would have never left the forge.
Well, that's why I talk so much about that scene at the end of The Dragon Reborn, and why I love that whole sequence so much, is because it really shows you who Perrin is, who he was, who he wants to be, but that he understands he can't be that person.
And I'm no expert on this, so if someone has done blacksmithing in the audience, correct me if I'm wrong, but it almost seems like you need a solitary kind of mentality to work in a forge, because the attention to detail is so great, the focus is so great. And this is just from having watched people do it. Mm-hmm. The focus is so great, and the cost of messing up is so great that it doesn't seem to me like a job that you can do while chattering away.
Yeah. From what I understand, and I, there's actually references to this from Perrin's points of view, you can spoil the metal, that once you start working it, if you mess it up, you can reuse that metal for something else, something lesser. But once you've started working it, you're changing the structure, especially when you're adding the carbon to it by putting it into the fire. You're changing that structure. So if you screw up the work somewhere along the way, I think you have to throw it in the slag heap, and then it's just, it's your scrap wood pile, that we both have, because, we grew up full rednecks. Yeah. I do remember reading a while back, from on message boards, people who purported to know blacksmithing, not as professionals, but just from an amateur level, and they, a number of people did say, I dabble in it, basically, and that scene from The Dragon Reborn is very accurate, at least on that basic level of, you need different metals, you need different fires, you need different and I'd never known that, of using different quenching materials to get a different set.
Well, just like blacksmithing, Jordan was a man of attention to detail. And I have no doubt he at least outsourced that knowledge and then put it into poetry.
Yeah.
Unlike the series, where again, you can't love physics and action movies at the same time.
Man, now I'm mad again.
I just wanted to fire you up.
It's one more stupid thing about what they did with Perrin, is besides just inventing this wife out of nowhere, they basically turned her into Master Luhan, and they just got rid of him. And he's every bit as pivotal, even though small, as Abel and Tam and Bran and those other, the men of the village council, the prominent men of Emmons Field who come back into play here, and who they also ignored or ruined, except for Tam. I thought they did a decent job with him. And I think a lot of that goes to the actor too, that he
Yeah,
played
they
that.
did get a good actor for him.
He played that, you know, strong, wise, quiet man very well, and was able to give it that subtext of, even before we get to the flashback scene of the blood snow, you could tell there was more to him. You know, that there was history there. He was more than just a farmer. So kudos to that actor, but please put all of the writers in Guantanamo.
Well, Sanderson has stated that he knew they wanted to do the Perrin killing someone in the forge scene, and he fought for that to be Master Luhan. So that was one thing he said. Well, I was okay with them making the change in the story, but
that would have been a better way to make chicken salad out of chicken shit. Because it would have mattered more.
Yeah. I read some of the changes he wanted for, he said he fought for, and it's, I'm like, but they don't help the story. They just kind of like I'm going to steal that, chicken salad out of chicken shit. It would have been better. It would have been slightly more palatable to the fans, but it wouldn't have been a good product just the same.
You know, we've ranted about this before, and I honestly don't know. I think we've both speculated while recording, right, that we don't even know they're going to do this scene if they make it this far, because of how badly they've ruined Perrin and the smaller characters of Emmons Field. I don't even know if they're going here.
Well, I've stated this about the show. I don't think they think beyond the season they're in.
That's true.
I think they're just trying to make something that they want as Wokies. And if we get another season, we get another season. My issue reading some of the message boards and stuff now, which they're moderated. It's like Twitter. You can't tell whose voice actually who actually dominates.
Who's saying what they actually believe.
Not only that, but who's being curated out by moderators.
That's a good point. Is this what the community actually thinks, or is this just what these people in the community are willing to say?
Yeah,
or able to say.
If it is to be believed, what you see out there in most of these kind of sponsored by the producers of the books and everything kind of websites, then you would say, wow, they're going to be around for 10 seasons. They're going to finish the whole thing. But I don't know. I don't think the numbers say that.
And as far as I know, the Amazon has not committed to that with Wheel of Time like they did with Lord of the Rings. Lord of the Rings was a huge financial commitment. They already invested the money into, now they could still pull out if it hopefully flops as badly as it's going to. But there was a lot of upfront investment with Lord of the Rings that I don't think there was in Wheel of Time.
Which is weird, because my thinking, trying to rationalize something, if I was to make a business decision, I could take more creative license with Wheel of Time and get away with it more, because there's another Lord of the Rings product out there. Nobody's clamoring for a new Lord of the Rings after Peter Jackson's, where everybody was still clamoring for this baby right here, the Wheel of Time. Yeah. And we don't have something else to fall back on except the actual books themselves.
Yeah.
And we're cool with that, but your normal everyday watch Netflix and Amazon audience doesn't.
Yeah. That's a good point. So speaking of those smaller characters and why they matter, kind of why I got off on this rant is I like this scene, the back and forth between Tomas and Perrin, and then Yvonne comes into it, and down on the bottom of page 17. Perrin gestured in consternation at the jam of the people. They shouldn't be out here then. Why haven't you cleared them away? There was Avon bringing his gray into the gathering, who answered, your people do not seem to want to listen to outsiders, not when they can watch Aes Sedai. I would suggest you see what you can do. Perrin was sure. I feel like this sentence is kind of important too. Perrin was sure they could have imposed some sort of order had they really tried. Varen and Alana surely could have. So why did they wait and leave it to me if they expected Trollocs? So good point. Then he finds, so he looks around to try and figure out what to do here, and he sees Bran and Tam and Abel with their heads together, and he goes to them because that it makes those other characters important. It's not just Perrin, it's Emond's Field, it's the two rivers, right? So it's lending it to me, it actually lends weight to Perrin as a character and to his story by having him not do everything, by having him not be the one who says, you do this, you do that. As he goes up to Brandon, Tam, and Abel and tells them what Bane said, and then they're just, okay, here's what, I'll do this, you do that. And then they go off, and it leaves Perrin kind of dumbfounded of, why in the world do they need me? Well, because psychologically and practically speaking, in times of crisis, you need a strong leader. I've referenced it many times because it's to me one of the top 10 shows on TV of all time is Band of Brothers. And if you've seen it, or even if you haven't, go find interviews with the real Major Dick Winters. Damian Lewis has some fun interviews on it too, talking about the making of it and meeting the veterans and all that. But you can find some incredible interviews because Dick Winters was a very intelligent, very insightful person. And some of the things he talks about are just astounding, but he kind of, in some of his interviews, he understood that he was more than just, as a leader, he had to be someone who was more than just tactically proficient. That was very important to know what to do. But he also understood that even more than that was portraying an aura of confidence, that someone has to lead. And so, you have this pyramid, this hierarchy of an airborne company. And so these people are going to look to him, and then these people are going to look to them, and then these people are going to look to them. And so you have to portray confidence, because then that will instill confidence down the line, which is both practical and psychological. Am I making sense there?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I think you said a lot of words to say that it gives the person getting the order, no matter how abstract it is in their mind, confidence that there's a grand plan at the top that's coming down, because you're going to go over here and do this. And as we read from Jordan's notes there, you don't see the whole battlefield. I'm being told, come over here and do this. And it kind of seems silly, but there's a greater plan. And that's coming down from Perrin, who gave it to Tam and Abel, who gave it to, and so that's where that confidence comes from, because it gives you it tells you there's someone at the top of the mountain that can see the whole terrain.
Yeah. Well, one of my favorite movies ever is Empire Strikes Back, and one of my favorite scenes ever is when they're in the cave in the asteroid trying to fix the Falcon, and Han, of course, being the impulsive one, just shoots the thing and it starts earthquaking, and he runs off. And it took me a while to actually hear this line. And I was like, rewind the good old VHS and wear it out until I heard exactly what was being said there. And then it was hilarious, but also informative of, so for anyone who doesn't remember the scene, Han's running off to the cockpit and Leia comes running after him, shouting that I don't think it's a good idea. The Empire is still out there. And Han's retort is, there's no time to discuss it in a committee. And she shouts back, I am not a committee. But yeah, two people together kind of become a committee. And that's the practical aspect of this is you can't take the time to. So we were ranting last time when we were political about there's a reason why there is a structure to our political system, because in the normal course of events, you do want those committees. You want that number of voices back and forth so that you eventually coalesce and come to the solution that is most acceptable to the most people. When you have 500 literal monsters coming to kill and literally eat you, you don't have time to do that. And that's something that Perrin seems to know instinctively, but he rejects psychologically, emotionally.
No, I think he more rejects his place in that.
Yes, yeah. It's why aren't you adults as he sees them?
It's more a why me.
Yeah, it's, he still sees himself as a boy in a lot of ways. And so it's, I think there's I don't remember if it's in here or if it's later that he thinks he keeps feeling like, I think it is here. I think it is later that he keeps feeling like, Tam or Sin or Bran or someone is going to come up to him and say, go to bed, young man. This is village council business. So he still has trouble accepting that he's the one that has to be that leader. And that's circling back to the dynamic between him and Faile. That's where she comes in. Of where was it? So the one of the things I wanted to get to here in this scene, besides
you talk about where she says they mean you to be the leader.
Exactly. Yeah. So down at the bottom of 716, I wish I knew what Varen and Lana were up to, he muttered, and I don't mean right now, because they're messing with the catapults, blah, blah, blah. They mean you to be a leader, Faile replied quietly. It is what you were born for, I think. Perrin snorted. He had been born to be a blacksmith. I'd be a lot more comfortable if I knew why they wanted it. And I've kind of been talking about this of why is Varen there, and what does she know, more than anyone else? She always knows more than anyone else practically, because that's her thing. But it kind of dawned on me when I was skimming through getting ready to record today that this is an Aes Sedai thing. They do this all the time.
Mm-hmm.
Of there's a fun scene way down the road between Siwan and Gareth Bryan about just this, of the, them talking about a conflict they had years past, because the White Tower had picked out this guy as someone who could end up being a leader, could end up being a king, and they didn't want anyone else interfering because, by golly, they'd figured it out and they were right.
I don't know if that's the best scene. Spoiler alert for about 10 seconds here. I don't know if that's the best scene for this comparison, though, because remember, they were completely wrong.
No, exactly.
Yeah.
But this is what they do, even though they are, we know from time to time, and I would guess just human nature being what it is, often wrong. You're going to see this over and over again in relation to Rand, because I can say this without getting into spoiler territory because we know he's the dragon and we know the White Tower cares about that, but they're going to try and manipulate things. They're going to try and be the ones who decides who's in charge. And ultimately they're the ones in charge. They just pick who does their bidding is how they see it. So in a lot of ways, Varen and Alana being here and pushing Perrin isn't even remotely new. This is just what the White Tower does instinctively. Now I think Varen has more because of the spoiler things we've talked about with her. I think she has more knowledge and more investment here than perhaps Alana does, but both of them are still Aes Sedai, and this is what they do. And they're not completely wrong here. I mean, Faile recognizes it. Faile has been pushing him since the end of the Dragon Reborn to stand up for himself more, to be more proactive in what's going on here. And she sees it. I mean, that's why she ultimately, pushed Mistress Alvear to go get our horses ready. We're going to go out there and I'll keep an eye on him because he needs to be out there. Both personally, Perrin needs to be out there. He can't just sit back and let other people do this. So personally, he needs to be out there. But then Faile understands, because of her background, way more than Mistress Alvear understands, that all the other people need Perrin to be out there too, even if all he does is sit on his horse and watch.
The only thing with Faile that you have to put in there as kind of an asterisk is how much of that does she know that that's what he needs versus how much of that she wants him to be, because she needs him to be that to satisfy her own feelings for him. Which is again down to that free will and fate discussion where this is
something we talked about, we've been texting about, that we may delve into in even greater detail later, is that's part of being a woman that we're not allowed to talk about. Part of being him. Yes. Well, and that's where you talked last time, I think it was last time, about the crowbar to the back of the guy we knew. Because a man was beating a woman, and this guy we knew said, and he proceeded to take the guy apart, but the woman hit him in the back with a crowbar or tire iron or whatever it was.
I think he said crowbar, but
he wasn't in the best
perspective to know exactly what it was.
Yes. So
he just had 2 shattered vertebrae.
And that's the extreme example of I can change him. Well, the other end of the bell curve is I can change him and it actually be a good thing. Of I can, I shared one of my favorite memes of the female lion trying to take down the wildebeest, and the male lion comes up and is like, "Here, let me help," and mounts her. Like, because that is the male without that pressure to be more and do better. It's
have you ever seen
me food and sex.
I'm gonna find it while you go into the next part of this. There's another one that's like the counter to that.
But this
lions are fun. Lions are great. I love lions.
This isn't. I don't know if we see. I can't think off the top of my head. Maybe we'll talk about this in spoilers if you can think of anything of the other end of the spectrum of a woman who I can change him, and it's a toxic relationship versus, look, Perrin needs Faile to push him. I can change him. He, in some ways, he needs to be changed because as Yvonne and Thomas are telling him, look, these people, your people, don't want an outsider telling them what to do, but somebody's got to tell them what to do. And they look up to you. So do it. And so to an extent, and through the series, really, he needs Faile because he needs to break through his humility and discomfort at this. What the?
Okay, so the cat I didn't find the one with the caption, but the when I had originally seen this, it was apparently when they're in heat, the female lion wants to mate some ungodly amount of times, and when the man can't do it, she bites him in the balls. And the face on that lion, just this might be our cover meme.
I'm gonna have to find that now just on general
I'm gonna get the
principle.
picture and I'll make a meme with it. Something about Perrin and Faile.
That's one of those memes I need to have handy just on general principle.
Just the
All right.
lion's face.
Uh, all right. So speaking of him being a leader, let me skip forward here. Where is it?
Yeah, we got a lot of ground to cover.
So bottom of 719. I love that. Or no, 719. This is good Tam stuff here. Of 20 arrows leaped out as soon as the first Trolloc appeared, the strongest shot falling nearly 100 paces short. Hold, you lack-witted sheep brains, Tam shouted. Bran jumped and gave him a startled look, no less incredulous than those coming from Tam's friends and neighbors. Some muttered about not standing still for that kind of talk. Trollocs or no Trollocs. Tam rode right over their protest, though. You hold till I give the word the way I showed you. Then, as if hundreds of shrieking Trollocs were not galloping toward him, Tam turned calmly to Perrin. At 300 paces? Perrin nodded quickly. And Tam is someone who, fully consciously understands what's going on here way more than anyone else here besides the two warders. All right, because he has been in a number of conflicts, including the worst war. I think we could safely call the Aiel War the worst war on the continent since the Trolloc War. So for 1,000 years. 3 years of big, ugly, pitched battles. And Tam was a part of that. So he fully knows, 300 paces. That's when we want our first volley to hit. But he also knows there is a chain of command and it is there for a reason. So I'm gonna double check with the chain of command calmly, and then we're gonna execute the thing that I was gonna do anyway. But so when it's all over though, so 720, I love this exchange because it's great for Perrin, but then you also he uses Tomas to reinforce Perrin here, so you get a little more of that smaller character. They had to know, he muttered. Faile looked at him questioningly. And again, there's the little things that I love about the way Jordan writes. Faile is from the borderlands. She's the cousin of the queen. Her father is the head general of a borderlands country, and she doesn't get it. She gets it as soon as Perrin says it. She gets it, but she doesn't even get it the way Perrin does right away. The Halfman had to know this wouldn't work. Look out there, even I can see it now. They must have from the start. Blah blah blah, etc. etc. You've a good natural eye, Tomas said, reining in beside him. And then he goes on to explain what's going on here. That it was a test and etc. and so forth. So it's not just fate. It's not just destiny. It's Perrin's mind is well suited for leadership, which in a lot of ways is, like repeatedly solving different puzzles. And to him, that's what blacksmithing is. That's why he often refers to, literal puzzles, because that's how his mind works is, I feel like he's the kind of person who would sit and stare at a Rubik's Cube for 5 minutes and then solve it in 30 seconds.
Well, so way back in the beginning of this, you said one of the things you liked about Jordan's writing is he doesn't speak in archetypes. But I would have to disagree because Perrin is exactly the leader you would want with the mind for it and not the personality. He is the embodiment of a perfect leader.
He's Cincinnatus. For those who don't remember, Cincinnatus is a legendary, and I use that word quite purposely because I'm not entirely sure how much of him is historically fact. But Cincinnatus is a legendary figure from the Roman Republic, well before the imperial times. And in the Roman Republic, there was a law for a dictator. That's what Julius Caesar would later abuse, was that were those laws that in a time of crisis, a man could be appointed dictator with all of the meaning that that implies, is that his word was law because there was a crisis. And the legend goes, and I can't remember which war this was, that in a time of war when the Roman Republic was being threatened, that when they went to Cincinnatus to tell him he had been appointed dictator, he was literally plowing his fields. And that he dropped the reins of the plow. He went and he took control. He took command of the armies, defeated whoever it was who was invading at the time, and then went right back to his fields. So he is the archetypal.
I don't want this job,
yes,
so I'm not going to grab the power when I got it.
But I'll do it because it needs to be done, and then I'm leaving. There are some great biographies of George Washington out there, and that is why he is in a lot of ways the archetypal American, because he was that way as well. I think it was Hamilton who wanted the majesty of the presidency to be on par with the executives, the monarchs of Europe. And so he wanted to, right after, I think this was right after he was first inaugurated, and Hamilton said something like, his Majesty, the President of the United States, George Washington. And Washington said, Mr. President will do just fine. And to this day, it's Mr. President.
Mm-hmm. Well, remember the Unity 2020 project?
Yeah.
One of their things was, it wasn't looking for somebody who wanted the job.
It was looking for someone who wasn't running for president.
Their idea was to draft candidates.
Mm-hmm.
And to get a big mass of people to do that. And then because that mass of people did that, then they feel obligated to do the job.
I agree with you. And I think that's been our, I don't want to go too far into it because we mostly talk about it in spoiler talk, but that actually is one of the failings of Perrin, and why I can't say that his story, even though he's still my favorite character in the series, I don't think his story arc is the best, because he's, especially later, too archetypal, too reluctant to it. It works here perfectly because you understand where he's coming from. He's still a very young man. He's very inexperienced in leadership. He's got a lot of world experience that most of the other people in the Two Rivers, really probably anyone outside of Tam is probably the only one with more world experience than Perrin has. And since Perrin has actually
the outsiders, Varen and
I'm just talking the Two Rivers people, but there's an argument to be made that Perrin has actually seen more of the world, and he's had to confront the shadow, which Tam never had to do. So you could make an argument that he actually is more worldly than Tam is, but in his mind, he's still a young man, and the adults should be the one in charge. So
which is great timing for us doing this reread, because when we first read it, we were Perrin's age. And now when we read it, we're Tam and Abel's age. Because I would assume in this kind of area, you would be in your mid 40s if you had a 20-year-old son,
Yep. So we can see both sides more easily if our decrepit old minds can remember back to when we were that young.
I do. I was an idiot half the time.
That is where we will be more critical later, but why we're praising so much here, because the reluctant leader archetype works so well here. And there's still some little twists and spins to it with the way Perrin thinks and behaves. If you ride even one step near the Westwood, Faile said calmly, I will haul you back into the inn by your ear and stuff you into that bed myself. I wasn't thinking of it, Perrin lied. That's a good, yeah, great place to end that chapter. So then chapter 45 brings things down a little bit, which I like. So we've just had this great victory that everyone is huzzahing, although Perrin sees that was too easy. But then we bring things down a little bit by bringing the Tinkers back in,
Which I also have a good Aram meme too that would fit here.
Who were murdered and eaten by Trollocs, and they had to run away. Maybe we shouldn't dwell too much on this because it might get us into complaining about the way women think, and then we'll get banned. But
we can do it in spoilers.
725 is where we get the kind of back and forth here of some of the men, and then look up how do you pronounce her name? I've always said Daisy, but I don't know if that's right. You've got
I
the
always
big
said
book
Daisy
there.
too.
You've got the big
Conger,
book
right?
there. Yeah. Look her up and see what the official.
Oh, the big book doesn't
pronunciation-
have pronunciations in it.
Oh, it doesn't.
No, it has every character, but it does not have the pronunciations.
Well, that's weird.
Yeah, that I found disappointing about it.
Yeah, because
She's not in any of
because
the regular glossaries.
Days, Days, Days. She is in the back of this one.
Okay.
So Days Conger. But I do find it odd that there aren't the pronunciations in there, because I read a lot of posts back in the day of people talking about how they either asked a question or they were at a signing or something, listening to people asking questions. And Jordan was very particular about that. He would stop you in the middle of your question if you pronounced something wrong, and he would correct your pronunciation.
But unfortunately, this was posthumously done.
Yeah. Yeah.
So this goes through all the books, and it has every character. Even if they had a name mentioned in there, it would be like, this is a person in this tavern that was there.
I'm gonna have to get that at some point. Anyway,
I need to find the big white book. I couldn't find a new one, so I'm gonna probably have to hit eBay or something.
So the prejudices are still there in spite of what is going on. I mean, they were literally just attacked by Trollocs. They know what's out there. They've heard enough, and some of them have surely seen what the Trollocs do. But I mean, those blinders are still there. Everyone knows what Tinkers are like. They steal stuff, including children. But
which brings some irony to this chapter.
Yep. Will not turn anyone away, Perrin said in a tight voice. No one. Or do you mean to send children off to the Trollocs? Of course we'll take them in, the Thatcher said gruffly. He rounded on Days, all puffed up like a banty rooster ready to fight a mastiff. And if you want to bring the women's circle into it, the village council will sit the whole lot of you down sharp. You see if we don't. You always were an old fool, Sin Pewee. Days snorted. Do you think we'd let you send children back out there for Trollocs? Sin's jaw worked furiously, but before he would get a word out, Days put a hand on his narrow chest and thrust him aside. Donning a smile, she strode out to the Tuatha On and put a comforting arm around Illa. You just come along with me and we'll see you all get hot baths and somewhere to rest.
For further evidence, they're probably never going to do this scene in the show. Did you notice? I didn't notice till I saw it in one of the comments on something. Sen dies in that first battle in the first episode.
Seriously?
Yeah. Unless this commenter got it wrong. I couldn't bring myself to just have to rewatch the whole thing just to see. But now, so we have no Luhan. We have no Sen.
I'm going to have to force myself to rewatch it now.
I'll probably do a rewatch right before the new season comes out just to have it fresh.
I'm gonna have to look up and see if he's credited though, because I don't ever remember the only
He wasn't last time I went to IMDb for the new season.
the only Emmons Fielders I ever remember getting pointed out and named were Tam, Abel, anyway, and the Alvers.
Well, I pointed out Sen when I brought up the cast list, remember, because one of the arguments was how dark Sen is described as in the books, but this crusty old white dude is Sen in the show.
And I remember that argument being brought up just on the general idea of racial color diversity throughout the world, and it didn't make a lot of sense.
Well, we brought up the point that it's not a statement either or, because we've both done some roofing and you get pretty damn dark.
Holy crap.
I would get close to the color of this damn shirt.
I have an uncle,
summer.
Great uncle technically, that we would do that kind of stuff with. He had, during the summer, he has been mistaken for either a full-blooded Indian or a Mexican. That's how dark he gets when he's outside working on stuff. And during the winter, he's not even remotely, but that is his pigment during the summer.
Yeah. I looked for it. I couldn't find it. I thought I kept it because it was so funny, but my college ID, when I went back to school here in Houston, I had just done a whole summer of manual labor outside, and you would think I was from south of the border by a long ways. It was I was like mocha, and I don't even tan that well. It's just that much exposure to it. You just eventually get there.
All right. Well, let's pause here for a second, because I need a break, and then we'll get into Lord Luke.
Yeah, we got to get through this last part pretty quick.
Right.
We're going to do spoilers.
Yeah. All right. So try and streamline things and move along as best we can. But really the next big thing that happens is Aram. And that is kind of a big deal, because it fulfills a viewing that we've seen way back towards the beginning of Dragon Reborn, right? Wasn't that one of the ones that Min told Perrin to look out for? Because it was one of the new ones that popped up when he said he was going to go with Moiraine, was a tinker with a sword. And we'll talk more about this in spoilers probably, because that's Aram becomes a major part of Perrin's storyline, and it's kind of a Greek tragedy. Really is I think the best parallel for this storyline. But page 734, I do want to point out, but now is conscious of Eldrin's scowls and Marin's fists on her hips and Natty's frown, not to mention Bode's weeping. Perrin walked back to his chair. Alana had gone from her place at the top of the stairs. Faile watched him pick up his knife and fork. You disapprove, he said quietly. A man has a right to defend himself, Faile, even Aram. No one can make him follow the way of the leaf if he doesn't want to. I do not like to see you in pain, she said softly. His knife paused in cutting a piece of goose. Pain? That dream was not for him. I'm just tired, he told her, and smiled. He didn't think she believed him. Again, Faile gets Perrin in some ways more than he gets himself, because there are some things that Perrin, that anybody has trouble being 100% honest with themselves. We lie to ourselves to varying degrees all the time.
Well, it's a survival mechanism.
Yeah.
If you were completely honest with yourself, sometimes you wouldn't be able to do the thing you needed to do.
And I think Faile sees, and that's why I think I hadn't really thought about this before, but we get a lot of revelations we get that revelation of who Faile actually is. What her background is, how high ranking she is. we get that revelation, and their relationship kind of goes to another level with the Tinkers. And now that I think about it, I think that's actually more important than I've ever really considered, because of Perrin's connection to the Tinkers and affinity to the Way of the Leaf. And in some ways, I feel like what happens here with Aram, of almost encouraging him to take up the sword and then telling him to go to Tam to learn how to use it. I feel like in a lot of ways, this is Perrin doing something, again, something we all do, which is stubbornly doing something he knows he probably shouldn't do. But by golly, I want to, so I'm going to. That, yeah, you're right. You can rationalize it. Anyone has a right to defend themselves, and nobody can make you follow a particular philosophy. But then again, Aram is at a very vulnerable point right now. He's emotionally shattered. He just lost his parents. He just lost all these friends. He only has his grandparents now. And he's been dumped in the middle of this town under siege in the middle of a small war. He's not really thinking straight. And had Perrin stepped back and thought about it more, especially the Perrin of later in the series, he might have at least tried to talk Aram away from choosing this path, or at least not encouraged it. But I think there's an angry stubbornness to Perrin here of,
Well, and you have mentioned his kind of internal biases towards pretty boys as well. And it reminds me of that scene from Fight Club when he busts that guy's face up after the fight's over, and everybody's like, what were you doing? And he says, I just needed to destroy something beautiful. And there's a little bit of that to Perrin when he gets into his angry state, kind of internal battles extend to.
That's what's personal with Aram. But then the larger philosophical is, and I think this carries through, and it again is one of the criticisms, I think, because I think it could have been done better. Not just, we've criticized Sanderson, but I think it could have been done better by Jordan in some of the later books. Of there's this resentment about the Way of the Leaf to Perrin, because deep down he wishes he could follow that. He wishes that could be the way of the world, and he resents the hell out of the fact that he personally can't follow it, and the world as a whole can't follow it, because his life, his expectation of being a simple blacksmith has been turned on its head, and he now has to not just be a leader, but be a war leader, something he really doesn't want to do, and something he doesn't really like about himself. He's kind of accepted it. We saw that when they first come into Emmons Field, and he explains why the White Cloaks are after him. They killed a friend of mine, and I killed a few of them. So he says it matter of factly, but I don't think he ever, until way later in the series, I feel like this is one of the better scenes that Sanderson wrote, was dealing with Perrin finally confronting what happened in the Eye of the World directly, beating around the bush there. He accepts that it had to be done here at this point, but he still resents that he had to do it. And that's I think a major component to his personality, and why he has this duality when it comes to dealing with the Tinkers, because he sympathizes with them. He has an affection towards them, towards what could be. But then he also resents that.
Well, I can quote Scott here.
Okay.
The way of the leaf is a beautiful philosophy as long as there's somebody else that is willing to protect them and do the violence that the world often requires. It's completely nonsensical in a world being attacked by the agents of evil. And I mean, that's the truth. When you look at something like the way of the leaf, it is beautiful. It is wonderful. As long as either the world cooperates with it or there's somebody that has your back that's willing to do the thing you don't want.
And this is actually something that is,
which is actually, let me expound that just a little bit more before you answer, which is why I don't like Rain and Isla in some ways, is because not only do they follow the way of the leaf, that's not why I don't like them. It's that they judge those that don't.
mm-hmm.
And
they are very unlikable in this scene, the way they react to Aaron picking up the sword.
mm-hmm.
You know, this is
it's not this scene that
grandson.
bothered me. It was the scene with Elias earlier in the series, because he kind of makes that statement that somebody has to do the violence for you, and they're very judgmental that you can get away without it.
Illa more so. Rand, the reason I like him and I find him such a likable character is because in that scene with Elias, he seems much less judgmental than his wife, and he's more it's more like he feels sorry for Elias. He feels sorry that Elias has to follow this lifestyle that he thinks, Rand thinks, is so detrimental. I think Illa says kind of bitterly at one point in that scene in the Eye of the World, one of those early scenes with Elias and the Tinkers of, she says kind of bitterly of, you're just gonna, end up dead in a field somewhere with your friends, fighting over your bones. So she's kind of bitter about that, and she's kind of judgmental that Elias lives this life, whereas Rand feels sorry for him, which is why I think they work together, and why he especially is such a sympathetic character. But that will actually come up again way later in the books, like one of the last couple of books, where Ryan and Illa are kind of talking to each other really about this, very specifically about this idea. So that's all I'll say on that. But looking forward to getting to there eventually, maybe, if the world doesn't explode in a zombie apocalypse. All right, but then the White Cloaks show up, but we also have Lord Luke, so there's an interesting dynamic there where
there's one subtle thing in there that I found kind of funny is Bornhold addresses Luke as the leader, and Perrin he kind of talks through it in his head like, oh, it only makes sense, and he doesn't get offended. He's still in that role where, well, yeah, he's the one that looks like the Lord. He's not like, hey man, I just fought off these Trollocs.
He doesn't get offended like he does when Luke makes eyes at Faile.
Yeah, he's like, oh cool, that's awesome. Yeah, go ahead and talk to him.
But we get more of the what's going on here with Luke asking about Ordeath. Did you want to say anything, or have we kind of made our point about poor Bornhold being an alcoholic lunatic? So page 738, after the bit of banter there, and I do not know where he is, Bornhold snap or care. I did not come here to talk of Ordeath. I arrest you as a dark friend. You'll be taken to Amador and there tried under the Tome of Truth. Even Bayer, this is why I like this scene about poor Bornhold. Even Bayer stared at his captain in disbelief. Behind the barrier separating the White Cloaks from the Two Rivers men, angry mutters rose, spears and bills were hefted, bows raised. The farther White Cloaks began spreading out in a gleaming line under shouted orders from a fellow as big as in his armor as Master Luhan. Blah, blah, blah. At that range, they could do little more than cover the escape of Bornhold and the men with him, if they did indeed manage to escape. But Bornhold appeared oblivious of any danger and of anything at all save Perrin.
Well, I mean, we've kind of kicked at Bayer a little bit as this ultimate zealot, but he is also battle seasoned and hardened.
Yeah.
He's second in command in these situations for a reason.
Yeah.
He's a slight caricature personality wise, but
he ain't no dummy.
But he's not a dummy, especially when it comes to battle. He may let his emotions take control of him sometimes, but he still knows the situation. Otherwise, he would, because he views everybody as a dark friend until proven innocent. And we have to know he's able to rein that in, or else he wouldn't be alive at this point in his career or life.
Yeah. And as the scene goes on, it's spittle flew from Bornhold's lips. So he's really unhinged here. And it is, as we kind of touched on before, it is interesting that Bayer would look at him with eyes wide of, what are you doing, you lunatic? You're going to get us killed. But a big reason the younger Bornhold has become so unhinged is because of Bayer. Because of it, as Scott pointed out, Bayer saw what he wanted to saw. He saw what his dogmatic views dictated he see, and then he related that as fact.
And in his defense, he's seeing something that no one has ever seen before as well. So
true.
We can defend Bayer like we do Faile a little bit. It's he plays a part as a caricature, but you also got to look at the rational points of it, where he is second in command for a reason.
Yeah, because he is technically proficient in what he does.
Well, and you also have to assume there's a different rapport between him and elder Bornhold and him and younger Bornhold, because if he was elder Bornhold's second in command for a long time, and he has this great respect for him, that would lead to that would lend to him having that skewed view of what happened, but it doesn't lead to him automatically having the same respect for the younger Bornhold. And then add to the fact that he's probably twice his age, and he's watched elder Bornhold, who obviously was the most exceptional White Cloak, except for maybe the Lord Captain.
Yeah.
He can see the difference in the son and be like, well, maybe he can get to that point at some point, but he's not there yet. And now he's doing this childish outburst out of emotion. There's so many different ways that we can give Bayer credit when credit's due, because this is a failure in the writing, which when you caricature somebody, you lose sight of those things. And we're only gaining sight of those things because we're discussing it out loud and in detail. Otherwise, if we just did a quick skim read through again, we would be like, oh, Bayer, the crazy guy again.
Yep. Speaking of which, speaking of caricatures, 740, the end of this chapter, and we're going to end Perrin's story here for a few chapters before we come back and wrap it up. And so I love the way he ends it here of, I thought you would object, Perrin said. The way I hear you've been talking people up against the White Cloaks. Luke spread his hands smoothly. If these people want White Cloaks among them, let them have White Cloaks. But you should be careful, young Golden Eyes. I know something of taking an enemy into your bosom. His blade goes in quicker when he is close. With a laugh, he pushed his stallion off through the crowd back into the village. The way he acts there and some of the other, I'm not going to go too much into it because it's super duper spoilery, but way at the end of the series, you actually get some point of view sections from Lord Luke. And
you get him from Luke as well? I thought you just get him from,
I think you get them from both.
Okay.
And I think there is an argument to be made that he is a true sociopath. that he doesn't do what he does necessarily because he is a evil person in the way the Forsaken are evil. He does what he does because that's what he does. That and he doesn't care. He doesn't have any sympathy or empathy for his targets. That's just who he is and what he is. And I kind of feel like this scene here kind of reinforces it. Although to your point, there is a different they are one, but they aren't the same person, which is
Mhm.
interesting. If you see the way Lord Luke behaves, and then how Slayer behaves, how the different looking person, Assam, behaves when we actually see him in the Wolf Dream. So there is a difference there, but
Well, you
together,
kind
I
of
think they form one sociopath.
we got to sparse terms here. Luke might be a sociopath, which again has that lack of empathy and just do what he does, whereas a psychopath actually wants to do harm and doesn't care
That's
about the feeling on the other side.
that's a good point because Slayer, Assam, is the one in the Wolf Dream who seems to enjoy killing animals, especially wolves, for the sake of killing them.
And
He like,
remember, almost all psychopaths show their mettle by starting with animals,
yeah,
torturing and killing animals.
that's an interesting dynamic I haven't really thought about before, and I wonder if that's on purpose. That you have two people who are one person, a true split personality, and one I think you can make a good argument as a sociopath, and the other you can make a good argument as a psychopath.
Well,
And
I would even put Lord Luke, just from these conversations, he'd probably be in the realm of a dark empath, which is they're a sociopath, so they're actually incapable of feeling empathy themselves, but they're so good at recognizing it that they can feign it.
Mm.
And not only can they
Well,
feign it,
yeah,
they're better at it than someone who actually feels it.
that's a good point, because remember back, in the middle of the book or so, when he first shows up at the Alcin farm and everyone's all excited because here's the he's a very likable person. Now we immediately don't like him because we're seeing him from Perrin's point of view, and we very quickly get the idea that something funny is going on here. And then if you remember back to what we saw in the Dark Prophecies, we go, oh wait, Luke, we know that name. And that there's something definitely dark going on here. But to the normal people, he is a very charismatic, very likable individual. All of these Two Rivers people like him. So that is a better way to put it, better explanation. All right, so we're nearing the end here. Jump up to chapter 53 is when we come back to Perrin and finish up this story. And he sweet talks / cons Faile into marrying him and then leaving. And also, so it all kind of speeds up in the end, as to the usual.
Yeah, so we can kind of skip over some of the action because Two Rivers fights bravely, things don't go as planned, White Cloaks don't do their stuff, which I guess is an important point, that the White Cloaks didn't hold their end of the bargain, really. And if you really think about what White Cloaks are supposed to do, and this is really important, they're supposed to fight the Shadow.
Yes.
You have a clear example of the Shadow right in front of you. And because of a personal vendetta, you don't do it.
And I believe he points out in that scene that there were some of them, there were those who, were kind of looking at Perrin like he was super evil. But I believe he mentions that there were some amongst the White Cloaks who kind of looked embarrassed that they didn't do anything. They just sat there in that final climactic battle. Despite what Bornhold says about, Perrin being a dark friend and him being in on it and all this. But, you could say that all you want, but then if you are someone who has pledged your life to what you believe is the ultimate embodiment of the light with a capital L, and you see women charging into the fray because the white cloaks are just sitting there on their horses, as Marin and Days and the others point out, we ran in to help the men because you were all just sitting there. And then that's gotta sting.
Trying to remember the name. There's a helicopter pilot in Vietnam that witnessed all in a particular village where the soldiers just went crazy and they were raping the women and killing children and everything. And this guy snapped, and he lifted the chopper, put it between the soldiers in the village, and trained his guns on them, and is like, I'm going to mow y'all down if y'all keep doing what you're doing. And I'm trying to remember his name. I know where I can look it up if I feel the need, but you would hope that in that situation, at least one of those soldiers would have that moment. And I bet you if one soldier has that moment, another one follows, and another one follows, and another one follows. And as much as we were just praising Bayer, he didn't do it. This zealot, this guy who is everything is dark unless it's proven innocent, is not fighting the darkness. And then rationality. They know if they uphold their part of the deal, they get golden eyes anyways. So think him a dark friend all you want, you still get to kill both. And none of them put all that together. And it's just a disappointing, but actually something we see in real life, true moment of humanity. Didn't mean to derail us, but I was going to just glaze over the white cloaks, but I had that thought.
That's one of the more important things that happens to finish up Perrin's story, because it closes that, at least in Perrin's mind, it closes that chapter of this story, of this part of his story, that, all right, well, that's done with. But then eventually Bayer and Bornhold are going to show up again, and we're going to see the impact of that on Bornhold, especially of what happens here. But then it also kind of closes that for the two rivers of, all right, white cloaks, you're done here now. We're done putting up with you. Which, damn it, again, back to the crappy series, is people do stand up to them. They are not an all-powerful military force. People do stand up to them. That's why you don't go cutting the hands off of and burning Aes Sedai at the stake and carrying around their rings like trophies on your belt, because someone will slap you down. And I mean, for crying out loud, a bunch of shepherds and farmers just did it here. That, all right, we're done. You're leaving now. You are no longer welcome in the two rivers. And they leave because they don't really have a choice. It's leave or be killed to a man.
We got an awesome loyal moment there.
Yes. So that, but before we get to the final battle there, the Gaul and Loyal show up. You got frickin' 879. He carried me most of the way from the mountains, Gaul said. A night runner and perhaps 50 Trollocs chased us for the first 3 days, but Loyal outran them. Damn, son. Lie still, Sharad. Yep. Lie still, Sharad, Shiad snapped, or I will say I have touched you armed and allow you to choose how your honor stands. Faile gave a delighted laugh. Perrin did not understand, but the remark reduced the imperturbable Aielman to splutters. I love because we the reader know more and more. Perrin doesn't understand because he hasn't spent time with them, but by this point we have learned quite a bit about the Aiel and maidens and Gaishane and all of that. So we, the reader, understand it more and more. And I like that we see this scene from this perspective of someone who doesn't understand. So we get to chuckle without Perrin ever really understanding what's going on there. Luke is creepy and evil. This is it kind of all comes to a climax and wraps up here, and Perrin going to sleep, going into the wolf dream to check out things, to see how things stand, try and gather as much intelligence as he can, and then having to confront Slayer and being able to fight him off. And doing so because he has learned these hard lessons that we've been talking about, this time and the last time we talked about Perrin, is that's why we kind of I backtracked and talked about that opening chat, the missing leaf of he almost walked into another ambush and now he's the ambusher. He's learning these lessons, learning how to be more deadly. And it's why this arc here in this book is so freaking great and always one of my favorites to reread, because it wraps up so well. He's not perfect, he's not some uber hero who can't be stopped, but he has learned, and they have been hard lessons and it has been a struggle, but he has learned. So there has been set up, and now we get a payoff here with him putting an arrow through Slayer, and then finally figuring out Luke Slayer doesn't make any sense, but they've got to be the same person somehow.
Well, and I don't see why he couldn't at least make an educated guess based on his own experience, because he's Perrin and he's Young Bull, and he's Perrin and he's Young Bull. And he could have at least said, well, Luke visits the wolf dream, so maybe he's like us, but he's like a bad guy, one of us. Mm-hmm. I mean, he would have been wrong, but he would have at least been partly correct enough to put the two together, And then battle.
Yeah, so then chapter 56 is when it comes back to Perrin and finishes up with the aptly named Golden Eyes, because he kind of sort of embraces the Golden Eyes idea, at least in this book. Okay, so this is one last nugget of thought on Varen.
Yeah, that's where I was going to go.
Yeah, page 930.
Yep.
Is I do not think we could go quite yet. You are a very interesting study, as much as Rand in your own way, and young Matt. Could I only split myself into three, I would latch onto each one of you and follow you every moment of the day and night, even if I had to marry you. I already have a wife. It felt odd saying that. Odd and good. He had a wife and she was safe. She shattered his moment of reverie. Yes, you do. But you do not know what marrying Zareen Bashir means, do you? She reached up to turn his axe in the loop in the belt, studying it. When are you going to give this up for the hammer? So she says two incredible things there and then just walks away.
Because first of all, she shouldn't, per what we've read, know who Zareen is, unless she actually visited Saldea, because he never mentions what Faile told him. Faile certainly never told Varen.
Well, she uses her full legal name in their marriage ceremony, though. So Varen wasn't there, but she could have heard about it. But
detail I missed. Okay.
But the way she says it does make me think that she knew even before then, because there's a greater level of import there of of what she says there. But then there's also the hammer, which is something that I don't know that anyone knows outside of Perrin. He's seen wolf dream things, and he's had these internal thoughts of the axe versus the hammer, but I don't know that anyone else has seen that or done anything about it. But it's a big overarching thing for Perrin that is seen in certain visions. And even mentioned, I think, in a few prophecies about the hammer.
Well, we could speculate on a lot of things, because remember, we do know she jaunted into the world of dreams at some point.
Mhm.
So she may have gotten glimpses of things about the future that we don't know about.
That's a good point. Yeah.
Everything with Varen, at the end of the day, this is not a spoiler to say this. You just speculate about everything, even when you know the truths that come out later.
Right. But those are now so staring at the Aes Sedai, he ranged stepper back a pace, pulling the axe out of her hands before he knew it. What marrying Faile meant? Give up the axe? What did she mean? What did she know? So Perrin definitely feels like Varen is in his head somehow.
Mhm.
And of course, they're interrupted by the Trollocs showing up and chanting a psalm, which interesting, Varen murmured, and then just Varen gonna Varen.
Which is the first time you kind of get, other than the description of what he looks like, the slight connection between Slayer and Isam and the prophecies. So unless somebody mentioned it earlier, but you get the prophecies, and that you kind of know it's a cousin of Lan, and then you get the description, but this is the first time the Trollocs are actually chanting it. And it's clear that he has something to do with this. We know because it's a reread.
Yeah. And you actually get a little bit of that in the very end of Perrin's story. It actually breaks away from Perrin and goes to Faine and his little group of creepy evilness. Because it mentions, where is it? So at the 942 at the very end, the Madral, the half man feared Assam would find it. Assam had not at all been pleased when that raid on Terran Ferry let so many escape to carry away word of what had happened in the two rivers. Ordeath giggled at the thought of Assam, discomforted. The man was a problem for another time, if he still lived. So the half man is afraid of Assam, which is interesting. And Faine, Ordeath, knows about Assam to some degree or another. Also interesting. So I like that Jordan ends us on a nugget of mystery there after he kind of wraps up kind of wraps up Perrin's story, which is a nice wrap up because kind of one of the things that he does here is he does something that he has been struggling, which is he sees the living. At the end of the battle, we already talked about the White Cloaks, but then after that, he doesn't let himself dwell on all of the faces that are missing. He just looks at the faces that made it through. Now, I think he still struggles to accept that a lot of those faces that you're seeing made it through because you were there to be the leader that they needed. And that's something that he does continue to struggle with, but at least he's at the end of this arc here in this book, he's doing what that chapter title was, what Faile tried to teach him after their ambush became ambushed, was care for the living. And so he's able to see that. And it's not an accident that he got married, that Faile showed back up, and that he goes, riding off with his wife to consummate their marriage right after this. It's not an accident that Faile is a major part of that, because it's one thing to explain that. It's another thing to now you live it in the most really probably the most stark terms, other than if they had a child that lived through something traumatic and dangerous like this, right? The only thing more emotionally impactful would be a child. So as far as Perrin is concerned, in his life experience so far, Faile is the most impactful person to him, and to see her face and her having been one of the living, it's no longer just a slogan of care for the living. It's something that he feels to his core and can do, and take care of her.
Sorry for the distraction there, but I have a little longer tonight. So
all right,
today.
Well, I just ended it on a creepy giggity. I don't know if that's where we want to end it before we go to spoilers. But that was my thought.
Well, there is a connection between violence and sexuality, and that's no surprise from an evolutionary standpoint, because usually it's the fight between the two alphas, and then the new alpha or the old alpha gets to get giggity as soon as they're done. So it's pretty natural, actually, and you start appreciating being alive. And what's one of the things we most want to do when we appreciate being alive?
By golly, yeah.
By golly.
All right. Well, that wraps up Perrin's story. Did you have any other thoughts on that ending before we get into spoilers?
I'm just trying to make sure we didn't miss anything important in between. Yeah, action. No, I think we can get to spoilers.
All right, well, let's pause there for a second, and then we'll go on to the spoilers. Oh, I've never had to tinkle so bad.
I accidentally hit start already, so that's on camera. Okay. Because you were still putting your headset back on. I don't know if you heard it. Where do we want to start? Because I wanted to talk about the only note I made was white cloaks and the soldiers not leaving, but we get a taste of something absolutely completely different way later.
But
cloaks.
What do you mean?
Well, that's exactly what spurred Galad to do what he did.
Mm.
Because he saw all of these people around him soldiering along and not actually fighting the darkness.
Yeah, he's a true believer like Bayer, but he's not a zealot like Bayer. So when he sees how political and how corrupt the White Cloaks are, especially in the guise of Eamon Valda, and then what's the head questioner's name? Asanawa, I think is his name.
Yeah.
When he sees how corrupt they are, he's compelled to do something about it. Which leads to his story, and where his story becomes so interesting. Because I really enjoy, I can't wait to get to him more, because he is so purposefully unlikable. But then you realize he's so unlikable because everything you know about him is from Elaine, who's kind of a bitch, and she doesn't like him. So he's unlikable because she's repeatedly saying he's unlikable. But then when you actually get to him separated and by himself,
let me see if I can put this in kind of, well, let me see if I can put this in concise words. Is she hates him because he's a stick in the mud and he's a tattletale and he's all these things. But he's a man that is trying to do the right thing all the time. And he actually understands that he F's it up all the time.
I hadn't really thought about this in this vein before, but now that you brought him up, it is interesting to see there is a parallel between Galad and Perrin, and that makes me think it's not an accident that their storylines end up together. Because as you were talking, it dawned on me, Galad sees the world, the light versus the shadow, in much the same way that Perrin sees the way of the leaf versus the shadow, that this is that they both see the world the way they want to see it, the way they want it to be, but then have to come to terms with the world as it is. And then what does that mean for their desired philosophy of how the world should work? There is a parallel there between Galad seeing the world in a particular way and then running up against the cold hard truth of reality. And then Perrin does the same thing when he encounters the way of the leaf, but then has to live this life of violence.
Well, I think Galad comes to it from the perspective of an order and chaos kind of duality, where at first, as he's developing, everything needs to be a certain way. The rules, he's the rule guy. Everything needs to be a certain way for good to be. And then as he progresses, he realizes that chaos and evil are not the same thing. Now, he's still an orderly person. He still has his personality, but he's made the realization, oh, just because it's not the way I like it or the way I think it should be done, doesn't make it evil, doesn't make it bad. And Perrin was, just because it doesn't fit in my puzzle perfectly, doesn't mean it's not a good thing to go along with or to have as part of my repertoire. And that's where I think Galad's was more interesting, because it's more deep. It's a lot more deep at the end of the day.
Yeah, and we're actually going to get to that soon, because that's, you know, a major part of the girls' storyline in the next book is when they run into him, and so you see the beginnings of that. And it, in some ways, it kind of seems like it comes out of nowhere because we haven't had a lot of direct interaction with Galad. We mostly know about Galad from Elaine talking about him, or Min thinking and talking about him from her points of view while she's in the tower.
Well, you also get, and this is probably what spurs the mental train of thought, is he had two rights to choose from. There wasn't a very clear right and wrong. It was saving the girls is the right thing to do.
Yeah.
But doing my duty is also the right thing to do.
Yep.
And they conflicted. And so when two rights conflict, and then you get into a conundrum and you have to make life decisions based on, oh my gosh, there are other things I have to think about.
And that's the other, I think the other thing we wanted to talk more about in spoiler territory was Aram. And again, I see this parallel I hadn't really thought of before, but Perrin just had to deal with that with, you know, I understand the way of the leaf. I understand why it's important. I wish people could live by that, but they can't. And so now I've got this conflict between Rand and Illa and the Tinkers in the way of the leaf, and Aram, who wants to pick up a sword. And he doesn't really think it through the way he normally seems to think things through. This seems to be a more emotional reaction for him than what he usually acts on. And oh, that hurts.
This could also be used later, so I might still make my Faile chewing Perrin's balls.
Yeah, I think it should be the ball chewing, because this
Okay.
This one's gonna need to be used later. And I think, you know,
I mean,
for
he
good
thinks this thought a lot of times along the way, but there's one point where it's
yeah,
super
but
relevant.
In thinking about Perrin's arc in totality, I do think, and this is kind of thinking out loud, because this is something I hadn't really considered more before, but I think Aram is an emotional reaction, which is, you know, not that Perrin isn't an emotional person. not that he's on the spectrum or something, but he wants to think things through. He tries to make himself think things through to come up with the best decision, and he doesn't think this through. He reacts and he's emotional about it. And to Faile's point in that scene is, I don't like to see you in pain. She can tell that this situation and then this decision he makes is something very painful for him. And he is, the way he talks and the way he thinks from his point of view, he's very bitter in that scene.
It's Jonathan Haidt's writer in Elephant, right? The elephant went and did what it did despite the training of the writer.
Yeah.
And the writer just post hoc justified it. So
and it comes back to bite him in a major way later.
It bites him in little ways all along the way.
That too.
Aram causes a lot of problems going forward.
Yeah, because he didn't think it through to begin with, and then when it happened, he didn't think it through and didn't know what to do about it. So it was just, all right, well, go train with Tam because I don't know how to use a sword, and now you know how to use a sword. Okay, but what? And I think it's Elias who points this out later when they come back together, is that boy, Aram's entire life was the way of the leaf. It was just destroyed, and all you gave him to replace it with was a sword.
Mm-hmm.
That's not enough. That's not enough for any man, for any human, but that's all he has. And so you can see how Aram becomes unhinged and acts the way he acts and does what he ultimately does. I do think it's a failing, unless I'm missing something, and maybe we'll talk about this as
Perrin
we go.
Missed something, and there's something important. Perrin missed the fact that his justification doesn't match the motivation by Aram. His justification was he should be able to protect himself, but Aram's motivation was vengeance.
Yeah.
There's a huge chasm between the two motivations as far as what the end result will end up being.
But I feel like where the failing in the writing was that Perrin never really addresses it, even after it's pointed out by Elias of, hey, this kid ain't right because all he has is you and the sword.
Hey, I hope they do this in the show, because this is going to be the only thing the actor they have doing Perrin would be good at, is moping about a past decision. Because he never addresses it, but he does exactly what the meme says. Aram was my fault.
Yeah. And it, in a lot of ways, it's worse than some of the other problems I have with Perrin later, because at least those other things, like the not wanting constantly having them take down the banners and put them back up and grumbling about it, and not wanting to be the leader, even though he kind of recognizes he has to be the leader, but he still fights against it, and all these other things that I've complained about his story later down. At least he addresses those things. At least that's part of what he thinks about and what he tries to do. He never really addresses Aram, which I think is a major failing of him, his character arc and him as a character. It's a big gaping hole. I think it's Perrin's single biggest plot hole outside of the one that we griped about last time, which was the three boys together.
Mm-hmm.
And how they never come back together. That is perhaps the biggest in the whole series. But for Perrin as an individual character, I feel like how he deals with Aram is his biggest plot hole, his biggest character hole.
Well, the three boys together thing, I was trying to think of how to say it back then, and I think it's like the way the MCU got in the movies. Everything was just so big that you couldn't even, it drowned out the interpersonal interactions between the characters, because they basically were all gods by the end. Everybody was a god that was a superhero. and all these random people on the battlefield were just random people on the battlefield, and it made it not identifiable, and that's kind of where it went. And I don't know if it was going in that direction with Jordan. So I think I can't say this was a Sanderson thing. And it just everything got so big, the numbers kept getting bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger, that you can't go back once you go there. And it made it almost impossible to bring them back together.
Yeah, and this is where I think Perrin could have been kind of the driving force there, because you actually do see that a few times, because he is the most grounded of the three. And his story is the most small scale of the three.
Mm-hmm.
And I think those two things go together, that he's not moving armies and affecting countries, certainly not on the scale of Rand, but not even on the scale of Matt. His story is much smaller and more contained, and he's also the one who focuses on the main thing more. I think Rand, because he has so much going on, he kind of gets distracted. Matt, because he doesn't really want to be part of this triumvirate, he gets distracted because he's constantly trying to run away from his fate, because he hates the idea of fate. Perrin is much more focused throughout, which is why I kept expecting him to kind of pull them together. I like your idea of how it should have been Nynaeve, because she can kind of she crosses over between all three, and she's kind of the authority figure.
Does she ever even reconnect with Perrin?
Sort of, eventually at the end. And so Perrin gets a good moment there at the end, at the very, very end, when Rand brings everybody together and wants them to sign the Dragon's Peace. And he is a major voice in Rand's ear to try and kind of soften Rand and help him see how to modify his plans to make them happen, rather than being, rigid and it has to be my way or the highway. So that is another one of those almost what might have been kind of scenes, was that scene with Perrin and Rand at the Fields of Marilor and the Dragon's Peace. But we're missing Matt, which is really freaking annoying.
Mm-hmm.
Instead, we get Egwene there, which is nice, because we almost have the band back together, but we're missing Matt, which is annoying.
Well, and you look at their place in the world. That might have been one of the place they put Matt in, with the society they made the Shanshin.
Mm-hmm.
He wasn't a true leader to be at that place. Whereas if they had made it to where the prince had some sway in the royal family, not the prince, the husband of the empress,
the prince of Ravens, that's what he's called.
Yeah. So if they had made him have that status, then and that would have been an easy bump. Anything militarily, he is in charge of.
Well, no, we'll get into it more later, but I actually liked that, because he eventually gets Tuon to give him that status.
Then they could have done it like a chapter earlier to get him at the meeting. They're easy fixes.
So much of this, I think, of our problems with the later bits of the series could have been more disciplined editing from Harriet, because there's not just for Sanderson stuff for sure, but then even the last few books that Jordan wrote, there's some extraneous stuff that is good. It's nice, but did it need to be there? Could you have instead put other elements in there to help bring these storylines to a conclusion and help, fulfill these characters? And or if it actually would have been a full 15 books like was planned earlier.
And Sanderson had a tendency to try to put little comical moments or little cool moments in, just like we see with modern television and stuff. And he could have even used that to incorporate everything we're talking about here. It
Mhm.
could have been something like Matt being at the meeting and just being Matt, like proposing a game of dice or something with the other boys, and Nynaeve, for once I approve. And you could have had this little comical moment that everybody would have gone, oh, that's fun. But then you would have had you could have had a great moment over the game of dice.
In much the same way that I pointed out that I really like the scene where they go tumbling down the stairs. So you have a very important moment happening here, but Jordan frames it in something more comical with Faile and Perrin's banter and kind of pushing back and forth against each other. So you've got a great character moment for both of them. But in a much more enjoyable scene to read than if it was just here's what's happening.
Well, one of my favorite comical scenes from the entire series is when Matt and Birgitte get drunk together.
Okay.
And Elaine gets drunk with them because she doesn't know what's going on.
She hasn't figured out how to mask the bond well enough. Yeah.
But at the same time, it circled a bunch of outlying issues that were going on at the same time into one storyline. And
that's a good illustration of what we're talking about here, because that not only was that a fun scene, it was also a clever device, because that brought the girls, Elaine and Nynaeve, that brought their story together with Matt's, because even though they were together, they were kind of running different storylines because they were doing different things. And that was a way to combine those storylines into one for the climax.
Not only for the climax, but for the whole next book where they're all traveling together. Realistically, because where would the cohesion have been if Matt just showed up and said, let's go?
All right. Well, I didn't have any other thoughts on spoilers. I think I did, but I didn't write them down. But the big one, or the big ones, were the white cloaks, because that's going to carry on and be more. But I think the biggest one here in this arc of Perrin's was Aram, because that it's a Greek tragedy, and it's going to be dragged on for quite a few more books.
Well, the reason I said the Rain and Isla's reaction wasn't as bad with Aram in my mind is because think about being like a minister and the whatever the top woman in any church would be, and you're married and you have a son or a grandson, and they come forward and say, I'm Islamic now. That's going to be kind of a traumatic experience, and you're going to react differently versus just speaking with a Muslim guy that you know. And so one would be coming from a place of judgment, one would be coming from a place of loss. And so that's why this scene didn't bother me as much as the earlier ones. But that's kind of where I wanted to go with that. I guess that wasn't a spoiler. I could have said that earlier, but
well, I was kind of beating around the bush, because there is a scene in, I think, the very last book where Rain and Illa are trying to help carry the wounded and things, and do their part in the last battle. And Rain does say something to the effect of what you were saying, which is, look, I don't regret following the way of the leaf for my life. It's important, but I understand that it's also important that these people, the wounded that we're dragging away, don't follow the way of the leaf, because someone has to do what they're doing.
And this is the biggest failure of the end. The song was never found. And we know what the song was from this book. And there could have been a moment with the Ogier, some of the what did they call the Aiel that left to be peaceful.
Oh, yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah, but if they weren't a clan chief, they wouldn't have heard it. The lost is, I think, what they call, no, the lost is what they, IEO call the tinkers.
Yeah, no,
The
no,
heck
the
did I-
ones that heard the thing in the bowl that we're going to get to here in a
Yeah.
minute and left, they could have had them, the Ogier, start to rebuild something with the song and them join in and the Tinkers witness it.
Well, that's an interesting place to leave off, because that is a big tease for what we're gonna get to next time. Maybe not exactly next time, but actually, no, because we get to Reread and the flashbacks right away, so we may get to it next time.
Yeah, so that'll be in our spoiler section next time, because
Yeah,
I think
and we
that's one
will,
of the top 5 major failures of the end of the book.
we will have to have a debate there, because I disagree. I like that the song was not found, but I have an asterisk. So we'll talk about that the next spoiler time, probably.
We
when
just
we get
talked
to
about
Reread.
how much of Perrin's arc is about rebuilding,
Mhm.
and we got a place that was blighted, and you could combine the two. You could have him rebuilding the people and
Mhm.
the Ogier and the new way of the leaf at Aiel and the old way of the leaf Tinkers all coming together to rebuild the land. And to me, that's as important as anything else, because we spend so many books talking about the degradation of the land because of the Dark One.
Yeah.
And then we've
Yeah.
talked about the entropy creating new life, because nature rebuilds what breaks down.
Yeah. Well, that's going to start here, however many times it takes us to get through Rand's storyline. But the fires of heaven, what we got a tease of in the Eye of the World and the Blight is now going to start hitting the whole world, starting next book. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, this has to be where I stop too, because I got a client at 4:30.
All right. Well, then we will see you all next time, and we'll get into Rand's storyline and see how long that takes us to get through.
Now, as far as social stuff, I got time this evening if you want to do it.
Okay.
But it's up to you. I just got the one client left tonight.
We'll see how I feel, because I slept so poorly. I don't feel like I've slept at all. So we'll see.
That was me 2 nights ago.
Hours.
So,
All right, and we'll see. We'll see y'all next time.